Well, turning now to the war between Israel and Hamas, we're following the fallout from a key diplomatic decision made thousands of kilometers from the battlefield. An Arab-led draft resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire has failed at the UN Security Council, the organization's highest body for the maintenance of international peace and security.
The result of the voting is as follows: 13 votes in favor, 1 vote against, 1 abstention. The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council.
Again, allows Hamas.
That negative vote that proved so crucial was from the U.S. ambassador. She said she has her own draft resolution for a ceasefire, and she will bring it before the Security Council in the coming days. Well, for more on this, we're now joined by Dan O'Shea. He is a former U.S. Navy SEAL and part of the hostage working group at the U.S. Embassy in Iraq. So thank you, Mr. O'Shea, for joining us. Are you surprised that the U.S. vetoed the resolution for a third time?
No, because the U.S. has a standing position on what is hopefully 7 remaining American Israeli hostages that they're trying to get out. And hostages were not part of the deal, which is why this resolution was voted down, but with the veto vote by the United States.
So the U.S. did bring its own rival Security Council resolution that would support a temporary ceasefire. It linked to the release of all hostages and call for lifting of restrictions on delivery of humanitarian aid. So talk to me about how that is different from the Arab-backed UN resolution they vetoed.
Well, the Algerian measure demanded a complete ceasefire, which cessation of fighting. The IDF would have to withdraw without any discussion of hostages. That's why it became a non-starter. There are still approximately 100 hostages being held. There's reports that 25 to 30 have been killed, but that still means there's roughly 100 hostages being held. Presumably, 7 of those are Americans from the original 10, 11 that were taken, 4 or 5 months ago on October 7th. But the hostage has always been the sticky issue. It's what was the first challenge to get the first ceasefire. The ceasefire only occurred because Israel wanted to get hostages back, and that's why they agreed to a ceasefire and they agreed to the extension. But so far, they have not been able to create use that blueprint for future success, and that's why we're at another stalemate today.
We're at another stalemate, and what do you think it's going to take to move the ball forward here?
Well, at the end of the day, the challenge is this: you have the 2 principal parties are not at the table. Hamas and Israel are not at the table. All these negotiations are being done through third-party intermediaries, the U.S. government, politicians, officials in Qatar, non-government organizations. So there is not Israel and Hamas are not sitting across the table. And the fact of the matter is both stated aims of Hamas and Israel, or at least the current Israeli government, is to destroy each other. And that's not a good starting position for any chance of getting negotiated settlements, much less a ceasefire.
It certainly is not. You know, you mentioned Qatar. It recently blamed Israel for negotiations failing and said a truce shouldn't depend on a deal to release hostages. Now, meanwhile, the Israeli negotiator walked off because of Hamas's demands and calling them delusional. How complicated is it going to be to reach an agreement here?
This is one of the biggest challenges why, I hate to say this because no one wants to admit to it, but there will never be peace in the Middle East because these are the type of challenges we have. And this goes back to the formation of Israel. It has been this conundrum, and it comes up every few years. They're either attacked or we've had multiple attempts to have a peace settlement, to have a 2-state solution. All those attempts, all those efforts have failed, because we've got 2 sides that are completely polar opposite. And when they both have the stated aim to wipe each other out, as a starting point, how are you going to find success in a negotiating table when the end state for both is the destruction of the opposing side?
So, what is there to do at this point then? Back channels? Is that one way to move this forward?
Well, the problem is that's what they've been using. This is all the negotiations to date have been back channels. I mean, to be frank, when they first made the first ceasefire and they were able to extend it to get more hostages, I thought they had created a blueprint for future ceasefires. But sadly, the Israeli position is entrenched. I mean, right now they're surrounding the last major city in Gaza that hasn't been subdued, where virtually 1 million plus refugees are contained, and presumably the rest of the Hamas fighters. And I saw a report last week that only 25 to 30% of Hamas fighters even been taken out, despite the large casualty rates of 25,000 plus from what reports are coming from Gaza of the casualties to date. But the news just keeps getting worse. And frankly, the worst of this is for not only the hostages themselves, but their families. Ultimately, they're the ones caught in the middle of this tragedy. And it doesn't look positive right now, especially with latest developments at the UN today.
Yeah, and all eyes are on Rafah this evening as well. Appreciate the time tonight, Dan. That is Dan O'Shea, a former U.S. Navy SEAL and part of the hostage working group at the U.S. Embassy in Iraq.